Yes. Oh,
All right, that's it, guys. We're live. We're on.
we're live now.
We're not live. We are live. No, we're live right now. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to yet again another almost last minute, somewhat promoted live stream by the Uncommon Communicator, bringing together the crew. I got the crew here again, Matt Oli, and I got Adam Hoots. Matt, introduce yourself. Everybody knows who you are. That's has any inkling of social media or LinkedIn.
Oh, my turn? Yeah, I'm just an average knucklehead, man. I'm just some guy that showed up and started talking about how jacked up his life was on a mental health. Was, can I use the term was? Maybe sometimes still is. And man, some of the methods I've found to make it better, and my love for the construction industry, because I'm blue collar through and through. And the construction industry somewhat raised me. So
I think I get the knucklehead, and so does Adam this time. But we'll talk about that one. I let you keep it, but we'll see where we go with the knucklehead. Adam Hoots, the lean geek, is with us.
What's up, y'all? I like knucklehead. I don't like the average word in front of that knucklehead. That's what's bothering me. But yeah, hey y'all, Adam Hoots here. Lean geek, as James Gable put it. That's because Buddy and I wrote a book, and he's older than me, so he got deemed the old dog, and I got deemed the lean geek. I'm here. I'm super excited for this conversation. I absolutely can't stand, and I'll even use the word hate, the word culture. And yeah, I look forward to diving into why, because people love to use it around me, especially James Gable when he's typing up the very next live stream. But to his credit, he also used the word that he can't stand, vulnerability. And I just heard Matt Oli likes to bat both ways on these words. And so here we go.
I did hear that as well, too. But you're exactly right. And words are important. We all know that. And you have this kind of, and you have not been shy about hating the word culture. It's just like a random post. It's probably some nice guy, that you're following, and he's like, yeah, I really love the culture of my company. And you're like, culture, with a guy throwing up. Like, it's just out of nowhere. Like, why did Adam just do that? I hope he knows that person. And the whole idea of vulnerability, I'll be honest that I'm not being vulnerable. I'll be honest. But, for me, I've been dancing around it, but I don't like it. And that's what we're going to talk about that right now, is that I don't like that word. And I threw that out in that post that we had in preparation for this. Just quickly did a quick Google search of what vulnerability means. And of course, you got to dive into, we'll talk about Brene Brown, everybody, like, she's a vulnerability expert. But when I dove into it, this is where I'm an above average knucklehead. I go doing a little bit of research. Everybody's throwing this word vulnerability around all the time. Let's see what the Google has to say about it. And the first thing up in those searches are things that nobody in my world really wants to embrace. Then this is it right here. It's vulnerability is the quality of being easily hurt or attacked. That's a Google search. All right. That's not something that I'm looking forward to. So we're going to talk about vulnerability, but because I'm the host, and also the saying is the culture of vulnerability. And I want to find out, what your guys' thoughts are. I'd love to hear some. If you're listening right now, make sure you comment. We can't see if you're in the comments right now. So go ahead and tell us where you're from. Tell us, your name, where you're from, anything else you want to talk about. You want to tell us if we're knuckleheads or however you want to do that. Let's go ahead and jump in. There's only one, I guess, promoted official average knucklehead, which I think Adam's already disagreed with. You're above average, Matt. That's for sure. So anyways, we want to talk about these words because what I am seeing is this culture. I love how you throw that in there, like Marsha Brady, that is pervasive right now within our industry. I say that pervasive, but you hear these things in LinkedIn a lot where people talk about culture. And then we're going to talk about the word vulnerability and what that really, really means. So we're going to start the arrows right at Adam, because we need to talk about understand the culture first. And then if there's time, maybe at the end, we can talk about vulnerability. I don't know. We'll see how that's going to go. But Adam, what's your hatred for the word culture?
Yeah, so I love how you said it. Culture, culture, culture. Like everybody drops that word. Everybody loves that word so much. But it's there's a lot that goes into it. And so I feel like being able to define that word together is super important and not often done, right? A lot of times when we think of culture or when somebody's like, oh yeah, I've got a great culture at work, that means, hey, 3 o'clock, we're playing ping pong and drinking beers, right? And to me, there's so much more to that word. Yeah, that is a part of it, right? If we like to have fun at work, I think there's a huge piece of culture there. However, to me, culture is an outcome, and the things that we do to craft or to manicure that culture, that's where the important stuff is. Like, I don't want to talk about, like, for instance, tonight after the 49ers beat the Chiefs and all the Swifties around town. Yeah, baby. Right. The outcome of the game is going to be such that the 49ers won. I don't care about that, right? Jesus, Chewy, my guy. What I care about is Christian McCaffrey got 100 yards, right? Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, threw for 200 or 300 yards. Debo Samuel, a South Carolina native, is snagging the ball over the middle, wrecking the linebackers. Like, that is what makes up the win for the 49ers, not just the win of the 49ers. And so I feel like culture is very similar where, hey, you drink and play ping pong and have all these cool things set on the wall. That's great. But what are you doing to make sure that that culture is reinforced and that those words actually mean something? And I believe that's where people fall short. And so when I hear that word culture, it's like nails on a chalkboard and literally makes me sick, Mr. Gable.
I can see that you turn green. You're turning green right now, man. So Matt, you don't have and if you don't have any problem with this word, I'll talk about how culture really did define where I chose a company. But what are your thoughts on culture?
Well, I feel like I'm getting schooled a little bit here, man, quite honestly, by Adam. I can't disagree with what he said so far. I think it's easy for us to use the term culture quite broadly, and I think maybe we're inclined to go, man, my company's got a great culture, which I have said, and I do agree that the company I work for has a great culture. Culture. But what do I mean when I say that? Well, so what I mean when I say that is that we genuinely care about one another. You know, there is one of the first statements, and I'll just have to talk from my most recent experience. One of the first statements I made to my wife after I started working at Ajax about 5 years ago was, I don't know how they retain this familial feel being a larger company like they are. There is still a real family feel, a genuine care for one another where we check in with each other outside of work. Now, again, to Adam's point, I mean, what's that doing for the business side? Maybe is one of the ways, and maybe this isn't to Adam's point. Maybe this is just out there, but I think I can't disagree with Adam in the sense that people talk about culture, and maybe more often than not, they're just talking about how they feel about their job. You know, how they feel about the atmosphere at their job. And maybe to the neglect of the stuff that needs to be in place, or the, you know, I can't use the football analogies because I'm not that guy, but you know, who's making the who's making the plays, you know, what's happening on a day-to-day basis that's making that company be successful, because people genuinely caring about each other isn't building projects. You know, it isn't being successful on the business side of stuff. So I guess I'm good with Adam's hatred of the word. I think I mean I think he's got some decent points there, man. But for me, when I talk about culture, There's it's the intangibles to some degree, man. It's the intangibles of business, of the construction industry. I mean, we work intangibles. We have products and timelines, and we got stuff we're building that has to get done. If you don't have that business money making side, you don't have a business. I mean, if you're not getting that stuff done, the culture for me, and man, I probably should have thought about this more before this live stream. But the culture for me, man, is really more the intangibles. What's taking place outside of that day-to-day grind, that necessary grind. What's taking place outside of that, or what's the atmosphere surrounding that? I don't know. That's where I'm at.
Well,
Off the cuff definition.
It's perfect. That's why I don't plan these things, because we're going to either see some real true growth today from all of us, or we're going to water ski all the way to the end. It's going to be beautiful. We're going to spray some water up on the audience. Either one, we're going to do one of those. But to your point, and I guess now that you're kind of batting with Adam over there, and I'm going to go ahead and throw this up there. We do have Jesse in the house. He's going to go both ways with Matt. Apparently, that's what Jesse threw up in there. We do have Jesse and Renee. Both are on right now. Lisa W. will pull up your comment in just a second. But here is the issue with the idea of culture, and I guess I'm gonna have to stand up and support culture. But I will say this: when I heard that word and I chose my company, people told me that the culture here is great. All right, sounds good. And I go in there and it felt right. It felt good. It was the right place, right time for me to join. But then for years, I could not find a definition. And maybe that's, part of it as well, Adam, is what is the definition of culture? And I had to, you had to really dig and find out what does it means. And Matt, you said intangible. So if you can't touch it, like, how do you manage it? How do you build it? How do you grow it? And what is it really doing? And that's why I threw in, that again, Google search, what is culture? It's the totality of the behaviors and attitudes of employees. I'll buy that. Like, that's something you're looking at overall, all the employees. What is the vibe? What is the feeling that you're getting from them? And that culture can be defined. And I think that's part of the task of anyone to find out what is that definition of that culture. And it says it can be witnessed in the way that you act, think, interact. It's everything you were saying, Matt, is like, those are the things that create what that culture really is. So looking at me for my company, when I joined them, I heard they had great culture. Everybody talked about it. You saw it on some of the socials at the time, great culture, great company culture. Well, what does it mean? I know this, that when I joined AP, when I joined this company, I could call any superintendent as a brand new guy, and I can say, hey, I'm having a problem with this, and that guy's going to help me. Like, there is this commonality of we're all in it together. We're going to help build you. It doesn't matter if I'm building, $100 million, monoliths, or I'm on a small project. We're going to help each other at a superintendent level, at the field level. There isn't those barriers that are sometimes in there when you have that. So that's a culture. And I think that's the hardest part, Adam, is it's hard to define. You just can't say culture, because in my mind, you think of Google, you think of the ping pong, you think of the shuffleboard, and you think of, what did Elon Musk do to the culture of X, right? He went in and fired 90% of the people, and they're still running because there were people that showed up and drank a cup of coffee. That was the culture that was developed with the money that they had. So those are things that really make it hard to define that culture. But Adam, I'm going to throw this back to you, though. And this, I think, is the part that the challenge is on right now is if somebody's complaining about something on the job, I have like zero tolerance for negativity. I'm not saying you're being negative, but the idea is, what can we do to fix it? Like, if you come with a complaint, you better come with a solution. And what's the solution? Like, how do we fix this idea of culture?
So I don't know that I have all the answers for that, because that I might be like a gazillionaire if I did that, but I'll give you my best shot. So when you read the definition from Google, it said, I think it said something about the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of everyone, every employee. And I will tell you, just a random guess, 95% of companies out there don't talk to every employee. When you say every employee, we mean every employee, the folks pushing brooms, the folks mopping up the bathrooms, as well as the CEO who's making the shots and the calls for the company. And so, I'm going to push back a little bit on Matt. And when he said culture is in the intangibles, right? That means like you can't touch it, you can't grab it, you can't you can't feel it. And I that's part of the rub, is that you can't do that. However, you can do things that intentionally make up the culture, right? Like, so for instance, right, Matt said the culture of Ajax is one such that people care about others, right? Well, how do people care about others? I think there's a layer deeper of questioning that needs to go there, because that's not culture, right? Like, just caring about others isn't culture, but I do this such that the culture is I care about people, right? There's a missing link there, in my opinion. And I love what Jesse said about culture is like the weather, and that, yeah, it exists with or without our awareness. I would double down on that. And I've said a couple of times, like, if you're not being intentional about developing the culture that you seek, then you're being intentional about developing the culture that you do not seek. And so my answer to, well, bring a solution, don't bring me a problem, like that traditional way of thinking, is do something, right? Like, okay, your culture is we play ping pong, like, go play ping pong, that's fine. Or my culture is we're like a family, and I don't know about you, but I come from a jacked up family sometimes, and so sure, I'll roll with that. But right, how are you demonstrating family values in your culture? How are you actually doing the things? How are you running for 100 yards? Like, okay, you have a culture of winning. Well, what percentage are you throwing the ball, kicking the ball, running the ball, right? Like, what are the things that we're doing that now we can say, I have a culture, right? Like, think of a culture of cells, right? They're things that are moving. They are tangible. You can grab them. They're growing. They're morphing. They're becoming something of its own. And again, I think like the key part that Matt honed in, or I'm sorry, you, James, honed in on, is every single person, right? Until you know the hopes, dreams, wishes, and behaviors of every single person within your organization, you have zero idea what that culture is going to be. You might hope it to be one thing, but there's some saying in construction, you can hope in one hand. I forget the rest, but see which one fills up.
Well, only a plumber brings up those type of terminologies, but that's okay. We might have some former plumbers, or once a plumber, always a plumber. I don't know, but so you make a point of the idea that I think your issue is similar to mine with vulnerability, and we'll jump into that because there's an absolute in there, and that's the thing, is there's never going to be absolutes, and that's one thing I've realized in the vulnerability. And I'll throw this out here right now. Like Brene Brown says that the birthplace of innovation, vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation and creativity. That is a quote from Brene Brown. And I had such a hard time with that because it's such an absolute. Like, there's so many other birthplaces and places where creativity, and innovation is born from, but there is an absolute on culture. But to your point, though, it doesn't. Should it be collectively everybody? And no. And that's why I've had the idea. This is the unwritten book that I've got, which is One Level Up Culture. The idea that you're one pocket away within your company of having bad culture. And so that there's people that are, I'm sure in my organization as well, everyone who has a great culture. You're over here playing ping pong, and I want to talk about the idea of money in regards to culture as well, because I think the ping pong culture comes from Google having flush with money, and people are happy, and they're feeding them, and they're playing ping pong because the money's good. So when the money's bad, when money's tight, and it is in construction, this culture suffer. So that's a question to have. But you can be one culture away in one pocket and think, man, that company is terrible, when in reality 90% of that company might be great. So where does that fit into? Do we have to have it all or none? So that would be my question, Matt. Is your company all or none? Is everything in that, when you say culture, is everything shiny?
No, for sure not. And the further you move up the chain, right, the more the more tarnished you get to see some stuff. It's not all shiny. But so two things Adam said stuck out to me, and you guys are professionals at this, because I see Adam making notes and stuff, man, or at least he's pretending like he made notes and he looks down at them. And whether he's pretending or he's really doing it, man, it's pretty impressive. I need to start doing that myself. See, I didn't realize this was going to be set up where I had to box both of you, but that's good. I'm down. All right. So two things Adam said. One is, it's the mindsets, it's the feelings, the hopes, dreams. I don't know. I'm throwing a bunch of words out there of every person in the company, right? So I don't think we have to go to the extreme of saying, do you know that about every single individual in the company? I think you can know that about a large percentage of people. And of course, that's going to vary from individual to individual. But but if you are engaging with, all the way down to the guy pushing the broom, right? If you're engaging with those people and you know stuff about their life outside of work, you know some of their hopes and dreams and goals and struggles, and you're supporting them in that stuff, that's the stuff of good culture, in my opinion. And that's the stuff that I see going on myself. You know, one of the other things you said was how, you know, don't let me lose it here. Let's see. It's the, what's that look like? You know, we all care about each other, but what's that caring about each other look like? Well, what it looks like is when someone has a family member pass away, right? And maybe they don't have time off on the books. You know what I mean? Well, I don't know. Am I going to get myself in some trouble here? People from Ajax watching this stuff, they get taken care of. You know what I mean? They get taken care of. When somebody's out and has to be out because of some kind of family emergency or personal issues that go on, in one way or another, they get taken care of. Now, that may be financially, may not be financially. Maybe you're showing up and bringing them, you know, you're cooking a meal and bringing it to them, you know, because they're in a situation where they can't, you know what I mean? They could use to have dinners brought to them for a while or something, and you get something like that going. That's the tangibles of what culture looks like, in my opinion. That's a good culture, is when you genuinely care for these people outside of the day-to-day business stuff. They're not numbers. They're humans that have human issues like we all have. And you meet them in that humanity, and you support them in that humanity as best you can, and with the resources at your disposal. And that changes depending on who you are and where you're at in the company. But it often happens with me that very frequently I have foremen or supers or managers give me a call. Hey man, so-and-so's got this going on. Just want to let you know. And if there's a way we can help support them in what that is, that creates that familial atmosphere that I talk about. And yeah, my family wasn't perfect either. I'm given I don't know what other term to use, but just some thoughts I had based on what Adam said. And if you ask me a question that I completely avoided and water skied over, let me know, James.
Hey, I'm not going to let you know. I'll let somebody. We'll see a note. We'll see somebody commenting in there about that. I'm not going to water ski away, my friend, because we're going to hit vulnerability in here in a few minutes. But you made a good point of the culture of taking. You're worried, like, what if people are listening? People get taken care of. I've heard of some stories secondhand of that happening within my current company and my past company, where people get taken care of. And I think it's not about just promoting those things. And Lisa W., let's bring up her quote. And she says, culture can seem ingenuine if it's all hype. And I think it is. People hype it up. And I think that may be Adam's point. But true culture would be an environment where people are encouraged to be a team, and when leaders support their teams. And I think goes to your point, Matt, is that it has to come down from a certain level. And my idea that it's one level up culture. So if you can have a pocket of great culture in an organization that's terrible, and people are going to love working for you, and you can do your thing, and they leave you alone. If the culture's bad and they don't leave you alone, there's a problem. But then she says servant leadership is the model. And I think those are some very important keys of leading that from a servant mindset as well, but doing that in a way that is genuine. And I think it's genuine when you're not hyping it up, when you're not like, oh, so-and-so got hurt, so, let's put that up on all of our socials and tell, it's kind of like when somebody is donating. That there was somebody, like when that bucket challenge came out, like they had money. I won't tell who the person is, but they like literally took a cup of water, dumped it on their head, and said, I'm giving $1,000 to this charity, to that charity that was all about that bucket challenge. Like, so, which is nice. Like, they got the money, but it was done in such a way of, look at me, look at what I'm doing. And I think culture is that thing that happens when nobody's looking. It happens in the dark. So thanks so much, Lisa, for that.
Hey, James, can I dive in a little bit deeper to where my hatred started?
Yes.
So
expected.
Yeah, so I was with a company for about 14 years, and I traveled the country like building some pretty awesome projects, mostly life science, clean room, highly technical type projects. And I finally found a home in Greenville, South Carolina, where we enjoyed the people, the culture, if you will, right? The Southern food, the people smiling, the nice weather. Like, these are the things that we liked about the culture here. And my wife said, you know what? We're not leaving. And so I reached out and tried to find a bunch of companies here that I could go and work with. I found one who I thought I thought they were the leaders in construction culture. And I'm going to leave them nameless. I'm sure you can go find them on my LinkedIn or whatever. But I joined that company. I left a lot on the table, right? The proverbial golden handcuffs. And this company had a culture of ping pong, beer in the fridge, work hard, play hard kind of thing. And I was with them for about 3.5 to 4 years. And they laid me off when COVID came around. And so that was a huge eye opener to me that, hey, you know what? As Jesse coins it, the say to do ratio is really, really important in this conversation, right? Like, we can run around saying that we have this great culture that takes care of people. However, when it came down to it, right? Like, as Matt said, when somebody's family member got sick and they didn't have time off, the do side of that ratio was like, get your ass to work. I don't want to hear that, right? Or the do side of my equation is like, yeah, sorry, COVID's here. We don't really have room for you anymore. When I know, quite honestly, it was a lot deeper than that. And so, circling this back to Lisa's comment, which I think is just golden, is leaders have a status, right, and privilege that they have earned over their time with a certain organization. When leaders can give up that status, right, and privilege to the people who are doing the work and allow them and empower them to actually use that leader's status, rights, and privilege for the betterment of the organization and the people in the organization, now we're really starting to talk about culture, right? Culture is not like, hey, look at all this shiny stuff. By the way, we got a problem and you're fired, right? Like, that is exactly what happened to me. Despite, working my butt off, couple of projects that were super successful, introducing lean to a few other projects that really ended up picking it up and running with it, right? All of the do's said that I'm aligned with that culture from my side. However, the do's from the leadership side, maybe not necessarily aligned. So that's truly where I'm at on that word, and what really just sparked that hatred for it.
Got it. Well, where do you think that disconnect came from in that leadership in regards to culture? Was it financial? Going back to that point that I do want to talk about the financial side of it.
So that I will ever know the answer to that. I mean, I did make a hefty salary, I'm sure, and it freed up some salary cap, if you will. However, I think, again, you know, I have a culture of vulnerability on my projects, where, you know, if you show up at 9 o'clock, I'm going to nickname you part-time something, right? And if you're showing up at 9 and leaving at 2, better believe that nickname's going to stick when the rest of the team's here from 6 to 6 making it happen. And so I think there was some hurt feelings in that. And, you know, maybe I went against some of the cultural rules that were there, but accountability is a real thing. And when I witness half the team working, or 3/4 of the team working twice as hard as somebody else, you better believe I'm going to call that person out, because in my perspective, I also want a culture of accountability, and I would expect somebody to call me out if I'm not working as hard as the rest of the team. And so as a leader, to give up my status rights and privileges to everybody else who's working that hard or harder, and to, again, just hold people accountable. You know, people don't often like feedback when it stings. And so I believe there was something along those lines. Again, this is all just kind of hypothetically guessing, but I think the team would confirm.
Well, so the idea that it happened during COVID too, like I would really like to dive into that. And the only reason I want to talk about the idea of the money side of it is you look at Google, Facebook, you look at X now, renamed X, fire 90% of your people, you're still running. Like how much fat was in that company, how much money was not making money now, like stocks are down. But I've been on projects where a lot of fixed price projects. And now I'm working on the side of working with the CMGC, you know, construction manager. So that type of, you know, we're setting and working with the owner's budget to give them what they want. It's a completely different mindset. I've not done a lot of projects like that. I would say 90%, 80% of the projects that we do as an organization, at least regionally, are projects that we've negotiated that way and worked with the owner's budget. Of course, we're always way over it, and then we come in line with it. But being on these projects, it's 100% a different mindset. It's like, what do you want? I can give that to you, but we don't have the budget. It's that conversation. Whereas you look at a project that's fixed price, and then you come in always from that negative looking, you know, people come in looking for that change order, looking for that extra money that they can make in that job. And it changes that perspective. And taking it all the way down, I've been on projects that have lost money. I'm admitting it right now. Probably the only guy on this group that have been on a project that lost money. But when you're in that losing money mode, you're in a different mindset of pleasing that owner, because you're doing everything you can to try to salvage it. It puts you in a bad position. And I've been on the side where we have extra money. They come up and they're like, hey, we're thinking about doing that. I'm like, I'll do that for you. I had some trade partners do that recently on a couple of different items. We're like, yeah, we'll just take care of it. That right there tells me that it's a culture of caring. It's a culture of people who want to support the project. They have the money for them. I mean, they didn't have to do that, but they did it in a relational type of way, where I think money has something to do with how we react in that culture. And it shouldn't have to be that way, but it does. And I think money changes it. Thoughts, Matt? Every job you run has always, I worked with that superintendent. Like every job he's run, like every job I run gonna make money. Every job,
it's what my resume says.
Have you seen a change in attitudes, at least morale, on jobs where the money's not there?
Absolutely, man. I took over there's been 2 projects that stick out to me, not necessarily with Ajax, that I've become a part of. One I started from the ground up, and there was multiple issues there from the company side, and then another one I came in on later on in the game that were both big losers. And man, you want to talk about anxiety and stress and all that comes along with that. So where does that fit into the conversation of culture? And I think, you mentioned something about trade partners saying, hey, I'll just take care of this or whatever. I just got done. I got one chapter left in Cody Fournier's book, MVPs of Construction. Something. If you haven't read that, man, good night. Good night. That thing had me up till 12:30, 1 o'clock this morning. I couldn't put it down. But she talks about the F word in there, but the F word is favor and doing favors. And she said it happens all the time on a project where it may or may not be in a person's scope of work, but hey, we'll take care of that and get that done real quick. There's a trade-off. There's horse trading. Anybody that's been in the field knows this works this way. Hey man, can we use your man lift over there? Right. I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. Hey, I got some materials coming in, man, and I don't have a lull on site. Can you unload these for me? And hey, man, is there a chance I can get a part of your yard over there? Because I'm going to be working in this section. I mean, you could give example after example after example. Well, that's part of culture, right?
Yes.
And so if you're creating a culture, I think now we're not even talking about a culture of a company, and maybe I've shifted the conversation, didn't necessarily mean to do that, but like the culture of a job site. Maybe you've got a job that's losing money. You got a project that's losing money, and that's hurting everybody. That's hurting subcontractors. Typically that's hurting your trade partners, whatever, there's a lot of people getting hurt on that, man. That's when you get a team effort together to try to pull out of this, to try to pull out of this. There's a scratching of your back, you scratch mine, right? There's, hey man, this got lost, like this scope of work right here, whatever this is, yeah, you can put a change order in. Yeah, you're not going to get rich off of it, but this is something that's going to keep the whole project moving forward. And if you've built that culture of genuine care and concern, not touchy-feely, that kind of stuff, but a desire to get this project accomplished, where you've built a team of people who are working towards this same goal. You've created this vision of, here's the end goal, guys, and we're all in this working towards that goal. I think somehow that plays in. I don't know if it answered the question or not, but I think there's some positivity, man. And I'm not talking about BS positivity. That's not what I'm talking about, but if you're the leader, if you're the project super or whatever that is, if you're the leader on that project, you let that losing project suck you down to where you're walking around, woe is me, you're walking around, you're Eeyore, right? Thanks for noticing me. This is, that's you every day. That's going to infect the entire culture of that job site, man. That's going to infect the entire culture.
Completely. And there's leaders that have that ability to do that. And what I want to comment on is talking about that. I had a superintendent, he ended up firing himself, where it was our first, I won't give you the whole long story on what we were doing, but we're rigging a very critical rigging operation and removing some equipment, across the building. It's the very first one, and it was way overloaded. There's a lot of issues with it. And he was a command and control guy, and he wanted nobody talking. That was his specific thing. I let him run it. I was the project manager at the time, and nobody talked. That was his thing. He wanted it silent. So anyway, it didn't go well. He stood underneath the load, admitted that he stood underneath the load, because that's what us iron workers do. And then he ended up firing himself. He ended up quitting. He was definitely, there was some disciplinary action involved. And especially from the owner's perspective, they're like, I'm sitting next to the owner. He's like, are you okay with that? And I'm like, no, we're going to have a chat about that. He ended up quitting. I ended up taking over the project. We had to do another one of these rigging operations, and I made sure that everybody had an opportunity to talk. Now, we're not talking about the football game that's coming up, Niners. Yeah, go Niners. We weren't talking football or anything, but we're talking, I want conversations happening. But that was an immediate culture change in that, or with that group of people. Like, they were stressed and they felt pressured by this guy. He's a bit of a tyrant. So all of those things can change with the culture of one leader. And that's what you're talking about, Matt, is like, it can take one person not walking around like Eeyore and being positive. And I think what you said as well covers, I think, the true concept of, a lean project is getting people to share with each other, work with each other, share yard areas, I'll get out of your way. Those are all things that relate to the culture that's ran by the leadership of that project. I want to hit a couple of comments before we move on. Oh, we might run out of vulnerability time. Sorry, guys. That just was not intentional at all. But I do want to talk about this is Jesse says, what's the connection between core values and culture? Thanks, Jesse, because that crossed my mind as we were talking about this. My company has core values and it's we care. And those core values were not really communicated. We had somebody in our group say, we should talk about this. So we started doing it at our Monday morning meeting to try to break down that. And then people are starting now to understand we had great core values. We were never talking about them. And we do this Monday morning shout out. Everybody gets an opportunity to say something about somebody doing something great. And the we care is the first one. What do you think it is? Work hard, right? That's the number one core value. And typically people were getting called out for, hey, 10 people stayed, late. We worked all weekend. We got it open. We're shouting out and giving people some, shout outs for working hard, staying late, working long. But another one that we have is enjoy life. And you don't hear people shouting out about people enjoying life. That one was an underused core value that we had. So it does tie into culture, I think. Exactly. I'm going to shout out to Maya, North Carolina mountains. Thank you so much. Jesse's got a couple other, he's on fire with us. I'm being careful what I pull up here. What I'm hearing is how human beings respond to schedule pressure and budget pressure. I'm not sure if that's a question or a statement. It's definitely what you're hearing is how people respond. And that can happen. Yes, Jesse, I would say so. Adam, do you want to comment on the idea of him hearing that it's people's response to schedule pressure, budget pressure?
Yeah, I think, again, it goes back to his question on core values and culture, what that means, right? If a company values, right, schedule as much as it does their people, then yeah, they have a culture of importance of schedule, and hell yeah, that adds pressure to the human being. Same thing for budget, right? Same concept. And I don't think we're saying that, at least I'm not saying ignoring budgets and financial pressures are bad for culture. In fact, I had a job that was a loser by all definitions. And we had one of the most amazing experiences, right? Because we did things that encouraged people to smile, encourage people to talk and communicate, to treat others like humans. And that project was a loser. And I would, by all definitions, classify the culture as being one that everybody wanted to show up to. So that's kind of where my mind goes there, Mr. Gable. And I will add this. There are a bunch of comments on LinkedIn that are not coming through. Miss Jennifer commented on Maya's post saying that she loves seeing her here and they have a great culture story. So she must be affiliated with that Robbins and Morton group. Then there's also a comment from some dude named Adam Hoots that says, are y'all going to talk about vulnerability or what?
Well, we're ignoring
on purpose. No doubt. There is no doubt this is on purpose, dude. I'm not buying it. He's kept this culture conversation going for 43 minutes because he does not want to touch on vulnerability. I ain't buying it one bit.
No. This is very rich. Maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I'm being vulnerable here. We should have just had a culture conversation. No, we'll jump into it. So we don't have time to talk about Steve Martin. He doesn't like status quo as much as you don't like culture. And I am disappointed that I'm not seeing all the comments in there, but let's go ahead and let's talk about vulnerability. We're going to do it. And I think there's a point where they kick us off of the live stream. So I'm hoping that comes quickly. But let's talk about the idea of vulnerability from my perspective. So my first time I hear this, I'm in a meeting with with the small projects team that I was working on. We often refer to the leader sometimes as the feelings guy, but he shared a video from Brene Brown and played this in front of our leadership group at kind of a little retreat that we were having. And he played the Brene Brown video where she talks about shame and stuff like that. And for us, it was something that was, it's the terminology is new. The terminology brings about different feelings. And I think that's the idea of, I don't understand it. So when he talked about shame, I don't like that word. We also had this thing, which I now have embraced, I have changed, but he called it freedom to fail during our team meetings. And of course I didn't, and a couple other superintendents, I never had anything to share on that freedom to fail. Why? Superintendents don't fail. We don't fail. Like, we do everything we can to make sure that thing is. So I didn't have nothing. James, you got anything? Nope. So he changed the word, and I told him that. So he changed it to freedom to improve. And I'm like, oh, I got one of those. And I shared that. So it's about understanding the terminology for one. And the idea of vulnerability, I don't like the word. I don't like how it sounds. I was not connected to that video that Brene Brown gave. It didn't stir me in a way that said, ooh, I need to change. Now, I did read the book. We did read the book as a group. And so I read the book Dare to Lead by Brene Brown. And I did it and I purposely had an open mind because we're reading it as a group. We're doing kind of a little book thing within our leadership group. And I wanted to go in there and understand it. And that's where I can quote Brene Brown. And I quoted it earlier, but vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation and creativity. That's a Brene Brown quote. I had a hard time with her absolutes. It can't be the birthplace. A birthplace is an origin, a genesis. It cannot be the only thing in my mind that brings about innovation and creativity. So she comes in with, as I read the book, everything ties to vulnerability. I guess that's how you write a book. But everything tied and fed and fit her needs. But she had great points in there about trust. She had great points in there about perfectionism. And I think that's where, and kind of reviewing it for this here as well, I've said this before, I'm a recovering perfectionist. And that doesn't mean that everything I do is perfect. It means everything around me is not. And that's the downside. And that's the downfall of perfectionism, is I don't see anything perfect. I walk through the job and if we're doing a punch walk and people are looking at all the different things, I'm like, you didn't catch all of them. I can see them, and those things bother me. So there is a point of perfectionism that is not great. It's not healthy. And I think that might be the whole key to me not being willing to be vulnerable, because I know that I'm not perfect. And that's one of the issues I also have had with not necessarily having, being open to feedback, because I beat up myself before you ever had a chance to beat me up. I've been there. So those are things that, in looking at, especially that definition. So culture, no, let's skip that one. So what is vulnerability? It's a quality or state of being exposed to the possibility. Let's expose myself. Yeah, I want to the possibility of being attacked and harmed, either physically or emotionally. Those are when I read that Google description, that's how I felt. Like, if you want me to be vulnerable, why would I expose myself to you for the opportunity for you to hurt me? So that's why I have struggled with those words. And again, didn't feel that connection from the book. And there's so many people that have been impacted by it. Like, they're moved by it. Might even, like Matt, you've mentioned it. And Adam, I mean, I've heard people talk about this, and it wasn't a connection with me because it meant for me this terminology. So do I need to learn like what it really means to be vulnerable? Probably. But that's why I've had such a hard time with even saying the word, because even the word vulnerability says, all right, let me lift up my side so you can expose myself and you can go ahead and get me. Yeah. Go ahead and say
James, it. Where do you think that perfectionism comes from?
Oh, shoot. You're going to do it, aren't you?
I'm just curious.
Are you trying to make him be vulnerable?
I'm just curious. I think vulnerability is an outcome.
Okay. Tell me more.
No, you tell me more.
Where do I think it comes from?
Yeah.
So I think there is a little bit in how I was raised. I'm the fourth son, so I have three older brothers, and then I was raised in a family that did not talk about feelings, didn't talk about those type of things. So what I felt like was the need to please people. So in that effort to please people, I want things to be perfect. And that's one of the things that I've noticed and I say recovering perfectionist. I'm still in the process of recovery from it because there's somebody else. And this is, if you look at Enneagrams, which Enneagram is a great way to kind of identify what your personality traits are. I'm a 1, which is a perfectionist. There's somebody else in my company. She's a 1 as well too. What are you? A 7? You're an 8? Yeah, I could see that. I'll tell. There's no time for a story on an 8 because we're talking about me. It's all about me. That's what I like about vulnerability. It's all about me. But where it comes from is me wanting to make sure that everything that I do is perfect. Has that driven me in my ability to be successful in the business that I did? Yes. So it has. But on the other side of that, I have found the point where I don't step out because I want it to be perfect. So I've been willing to accept things that aren't perfect in that attempt to, I guess, kind of get out of because I feel sometimes locked up by it.
Yeah, Jesse's got a great comment. If you could just bring that last comment up. How much criticism and I guess trolls have you received from your podcast? Putting it out there.
0.
What does that mean?
0 is a number that means nothing. I have not received any negative feedback or has it affected me in any way in that level. And I'll tell you, this started with a conversation. I started the podcast first because you were vulnerable, Adam. You stepped out, you changed, you put your paid job aside and you went out on your own. And it was your post that said, you know what? He's sitting there changing his life right now. And I can't even get out of this podcast idea. So that was one of it. And Jesse as well, listening to his podcast. So those things helped me make that step out into it. But that's a great question, is how much negativity have I had? Trolls? Have I been exposed to that? I haven't. Now, so maybe that's it. It's that easy.
So I'm gonna
vulnerability. I'm vulnerable. Thanks, guys. That's all the time we got. No, go ahead, Matt. What do you got?
Man, I love this conversation, and I am a unashamed fanboy of Brene Brown's work. I love her work, man. I really do. I have consumed just about everything I could get from her. Here's where I'm going to go with it: is vulnerability as your Google definition. I'm good with it, man. It's risk. It's risk, right? So the question I would ask anybody is, what have you ever done that didn't require some risk? What have you ever done meaningful that didn't have some risk involved? There's always a risk. There's always a risk if it's in relationships, if it's in business, if it's in having children, if it's in having a conversation with somebody you don't know very well. You're always opening yourself up to some degree or another of risking something there. This jumping on a podcast, man, Jesse nailed it. Jumping on a podcast, you are open yourself up. That is vulnerability, because somebody's going to jump on at some point. This is why, side note, I loved LinkedIn. I heard somebody call LinkedIn the other day the adult social media. I love that. I freaking love that. That's why I'm not on many of the other socials or anything. I may start jumping back on them. But man, you open yourself up to risk all the time. How much becomes the question as far as vulnerability goes? How much are you willing to be vulnerable? And my take is, the more you're willing to risk being vulnerable, the more the rewards are going to be in return. that one of the, and I don't know that this, I don't believe it's a verbatim quote from Brene Brown, but the key point I take away from almost all of her work is there is no real human connection without vulnerability. If I don't open up to you a little bit, just even a little bit, about who I really am, that connection is all surface level at that point. You're just both putting that mask on, right? You've just both shown up with that persona of whatever it is that you've created, that you're comfortable showing the whole world, right? This is the comfortable side of me. This is the person, man. I had people for years. I've had multiple people through the years, when we get to know each other, go, you are not at all the dude I thought you were. Because I carried myself like this tough construction guy. I got the beard. I got jailhouse tattoos. Kick your ass. Oh, sorry, A word. But like, that was this persona that I felt like I had to carry myself around with, you know? And then you get to know somebody and you get talking to them. And genuinely, I've had multiple people through the years go, dude, you're not at all who I thought you were. You take off that mask a little bit. And I try not to walk around like that guy anymore, by the way. I'm try to be conscious about that, you know. But you let down the mask just a little bit, you know. Expose that heart, expose that belly, that soft underbelly just a little bit, as much as you're comfortable with, right? Hey, this is a G-rated podcast here, Adam. But you expose it just a little bit. I love Jesse's quote, vulnerability is contagious. You start doing that a little bit, man. I mean, heck, and I don't know. I think maybe I take it too much to the extreme, which is to be quite honest with you, is the nature of my life. Everything I've done is too much to the extreme. But you start sharing stuff like me, like I've started sharing on LinkedIn. And, you know, look, I've said it before. The stories are fabricated, kind of, right? I mean, there's some stuff in there, man, you know, whether it's from my own life or stuff I've witnessed or whatever else. You start opening up yourself a little bit, and people, man, it is a magnet for people who want to talk. We just had this little conversation yesterday. Adam was in there. I'll call him. Can I say that? Can I say Adam was in there? We got a little discussion group we're having around a book right now. You want to talk about some guys getting vulnerable? Talking about what's going on in their lives? Because it's contagious. And you start talking about it. And that's where the real, that's where, for me, and I'm passionate about this, it's probably obvious. That's where the real stuff happens, man. That's where the real life stuff happens. When you start being willing to go, hey, man, I've struggled with that too. Or, hey, I've had ideations of suicide at times in my life too. Or, hey, I've had relationship issues too. Or, hey, I've felt like a failure at my job too. Whatever it is, when you start opening up about that stuff and just being real about it, dude, the rewards that come back with that risk, tenfold, hundredfold. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Matt. And I'm farther along than I want to portray at the beginning of this podcast, but I got so far to go. But everything that you're talking about, and you touched on, and I got Jesse's quote up there about, you know, vulnerability is contagious. I would not be hanging out and I would not be having this conversation if it wasn't. And a lot of the stuff that you posted, in fact, you had a post recently where you talked about being authentic, and I think that's where I'm drawn to that connection of authenticity. And then I realize that it's lacking in my life because I'm looking at, this is the persona, the image that I want to put across is not real. It's what I think it should be. And so when you start diving into the idea of being vulnerable, I don't know how to do it. And I think that's one of the biggest struggles for me is I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to show it. I haven't sat in any, you know, hours of therapy to really know how. Now, but do I recognize it as a problem? Yes. So at least maybe I've hit one of the steps. I don't know. I'm there. I'm acknowledging it right now to everybody that I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to express it effectively, and then I want to. So vulnerability is contagious. I also want to throw in Jesse's, because Jesse's going to drive this home for us. Is his suggestion is to spend less time intellectualizing these words and more time sharing your gifts and talents, and you'll be all right. And that's the hard part, is for me getting out of that mindset. So not knowing how to do it, not knowing how to express it. There was a time, and this has been a progression really over, for me, a lot of years. Like I had zero feelings, no emotions, no expression. I stuffed them away so deep that I wasn't. So it allowed me to respond on projects without being emotional. When things happen, we hit a sprinkler pipe, I calmly walked over and did what I needed to do. And then somebody said, like, well, you're like you're like an ER surgeon. Well, was I, or was I just that emotion? I was calm in the moment of trial. To me, that's a skill set to have. We don't have that. We see people freak out. But the other thing, and this is the vulnerable moment that we'll have in our time remaining. I don't know. Do they kick you out of this thing? I'm going to keep it running. But I was reading a book every year at Christmas time. We would read stories to our kids. My wife would pick the book, and we would go through it. They're always Hallmarky type books, and I would read them. And this one particular year, and I was working out of town at that point. I was working in Jacksonville, Florida. Came home for the weekend. Hadn't spent a lot of time with the family. I can't even remember what that book was, but it touched me in a way that I didn't know how to, in front of my kids and family and wife, how to respond. And I started laughing, and they're looking at me like I was nuts. And I'm like, and I've done this more than once. I've laughed in the point of emotion because I don't know how to connect those dots and to show that emotion in a way without it locking me up, my throat tightening up, stuff like that. So I laughed. Then I kind of went through that, and I admitted, it's funny to share that story now, but it's a sad story because, but it's a great story because that was probably a point of awakening for me to realize that this vulnerability thing, goes deeper than just me being authentic with people. It's something that I don't know how to express. And so by doing that story was a start. And there's been some other inclinations for me in trying to work through death, working through some other things to be able to talk through them, because we don't talk about it. Gables don't talk. I wish my brother Ed was on and could comment. Like, we don't talk. Like, we might nod our heads at each other, but that's and that's not a great culture. And I get it. And that goes back to Jesse's thing of vulnerability is contagious, is we wouldn't be here talking about it if it wasn't something that we saw the value in the authenticity of it. I got to throw up Steve Martin's quote, preach it, Matt. He loves it. In the space of continuous improvement, the ultimate question is, how much do you want to journey towards better? The bigger the risk, the better, the bigger, the better. And you nailed it, Matt. I mean, there's no growth without taking some kind of risk. I would not be married if I had not taken a risk. There's so many other relationships that can be talked about. I wouldn't be in the job that I was at without a risk, even though I'm a ruts guy. And, I'll stay in that rut as long as I can. Until you get out of that rut, there isn't growth on that other side.
James, I think you just hit something very powerful for me, right? You mentioned your struggle with vulnerability because you don't know how. I think I fit that bucket very, very well, just the same, right? In the Hoots household, we don't say I love you. We don't hug each other. Like, those are weak, not manly things to do. And vulnerability, I think, fits in that bucket as well. One of the things that has served me very, very well is when I recognize and see the trait of vulnerability in other people, like Matt Oley, for instance, or Jesse Hernandez, for instance. I latch on, man. And I just like Jesse said, if vulnerability is truly contagious, then I need to hang out with those people who are exercising those muscles. And for me, again, sorry to call you out, Matt, but when I saw some of those LinkedIn posts, I was like, dude, I got to have me some Oli in my life. And It's been huge. It really has. Like Matt, we talk probably every couple of weeks or so, and one of the things that helps even more is like when those people who are being vulnerable have stories that sound like yours and maybe are like even a little more like whoa, like holy cow, like I've never done something like that. Like that makes it easier for me personally to go out there. And the last thing I'll say is I like surprisingly, we've had an hour and 5 minutes of the culture of vulnerability. And I believe the word trust has only come up less than 5 times or so.
Mhm.
I believe that that is the key to creating this culture or scene or whatever we want to call it of the ability to be vulnerable. Because if I don't trust you, it ain't happening, period. And so, like, even just coming on here, like, yeah, we've got a culture between the three of us. And I'm kind of blocking out in my mind who else might be watching this that I don't know, I don't trust, and is collecting dirt on me right now.
Dude, you make a, and I know we probably got to just tell me to shut up when I need to, but we, you know, dude, you make a great point when you say that who's collecting dirt on me right now. I mean, I you want some more just honest. One of the reasons I'm not on a lot of other socials, man, bro, I start showing up on Facebook talking about this stuff. I start showing up on, dude, there are people that know my past. There are plenty of people that know my past. Oh, now Matt's got his stuff together. Now Matt can go talking about, vulnerability and how mental health and all that. Let me tell you a little story about Matt. You know what I mean? Those stories are there, man. They're there. And there's a long sordid past there of stuff that I'm not proud of, Matt. And so I'm tiptoeing a little bit. It's like, hey, I'm on LinkedIn, guys. How's it going? Let's talk about being vulnerable on LinkedIn. Oh, you want me on your Facebook? Bro, I don't think I can. Nah, I'm good. I'm good on Facebook. But that's real, man. That's real life. That's real
Well,
life. And if you guys see me smiling, like both of you guys have said stuff, I got to say this. Both of you guys have said stuff that I'm over here smiling about that maybe you wouldn't think needs to be smiled about. It's because I feel it, man. I feel it, and I resonate with it because, and not that I'm on some other level, because I'm not, but I remember and can feel those feelings again, and it makes me smile because I go, yeah, I get that. I get that. So don't take my smiles the wrong way. If you're saying something that I probably shouldn't be smiling about, and I do, it's because I get it, and I'm glad to hear you talking about it.
well, thanks for sharing, Matt. No, I didn't. Actually, I didn't take it that way at all. Are you kidding me? I laughed at a sad children's story on Christmas. I mean, I understand, but you make a great point of, and I think the different socials might be different. And I was serious about the culture of vulnerability, because I think there is a growing culture of vulnerability, and it's acceptable, and it is contagious, and it is something that is going to be the gap, or it's going to bridge the gap that's going to help mental health in construction. It's going to help mental health on our projects, is the ability to have that conversation. I've had our director of operations had made a comment when it was Mental Health Week. We brought on that, and he's like the Ron, it was just, I forget the name of that. Yep. And so we'll say it again. Oh, so anyways, he brought in and he shared some stories about some friends of his that were struggling. And you're hearing that in organizations where it's okay. He at that level made it okay for us. Hey guys, I went through a hard time during COVID, and let's talk about this. Let's have those conversations. And that's what I'm not very good at. And so you're seeing that culture change. And I really do think that it is contagious. I think it is going to be the salve. It's going to be the ointment. It's going to be the stuff that helps these pains and hurts. And I do think, to your point, Matt, there is some trolls in some other organization that I work with in regards to Facebook and some of the other ones where people just, I I stopped following them. I stopped listening to them. I have a zero tolerance for negativity. And there seems to be a lot of this culture that's acceptable. And the great people that I hang out with, Adam, Jen Lacey, Jesse Hernandez, Steve Martin, the whole No BS tribe, this whole group of people who are saying, Buddy Brumley, I mean, good for you. And there's so many other construction superintendents who are embracing this and bringing it to our project sites, maybe at a level that we're not even skilled enough to manage it like Jen Lacey does. And I've had her on my podcast twice. Why? Because I want to learn from her. So I'm willing to. It's contagious. I'm not saying no to it, but I'm also still saying that I got a long way to go. And we probably all got a long way to go in some way. And so we are going to, did we get kicked off?
No, we're still going, baby.
So let's do closing statements. Let's go around and have an opportunity to kind of wrap it up. So Matt, we're going to start with you.
Closing statement. Take the risk. Take the risk, man. The doors that will open for you, and I don't just mean like career wise, but the deep, genuine connections you will build with one-on-one people or in a larger audience. If you're willing to take the risk to be a little vulnerable and be authentically you and talk about maybe some of your failures or your struggles, and take that risk, because the rewards are hard to quantify. How's that?
I love it. I mean, that's very concise, and that's absolutely one of the most important things that we can do. Adam, you got closing statements?
I do, and I'm going to contradict myself here just a little bit, intentionally and vulnerably, right? Like, so to expand on what Matt just said, go first, right? Like, don't hang out and wait for somebody else to go before you can let it be contagious, right? So go first, put your foot in the water, and you only have to dip a toe, and then you can tell if the people around you are listening and supportive, because then they'll ask you that next question where they're interested, where you actually go a little bit deeper, and it gets easier and easier each time that we go for it. Now, for the contradiction part, right? Like, too much vulnerability is going to be a bad thing, right? If I run around at work and I'm like, hey, I messed this up today and I messed that up today and I screwed that one up last week, and next week I'm going to like, now we might start talking about a competency issue. And so I think there is a good level of vulnerability to get to. And I think it's hard, right? But surround yourself with people who you trust, people who are doing it, and it makes it very, very much easier to experiment and explore with the concept of vulnerability.
And you nailed it with the word trust, and we did not touch on that enough. And I think that's where it comes from, this contagious group that we're talking about and being around and hanging around, is you start seeing that little bit of trust to know a little bit of that sharing. And I like Matt, like, go first. You know, it's okay to step out there and go first and be there. But if you're not okay with going first, at least follow along with that, and then help us all kind of navigate through what this means for the overall good of our construction. Really is going to be the culture of vulnerability. I really believe is going to be this pervasive thing that we're growing, and it's going to help people at the end of the day. So I want to thank everybody for coming onto the live stream. I think I got 15 minutes. I don't know. I'm trying. This is my first time kind of pushing the limits on the schedule. According to Felipe, all schedules are a lie. So that is something that, like, an hour-ish is something that it's going to take. But I want to thank everybody. I couldn't see all the comments. I didn't want to click away from the live stream and see you bye. But I'll go back. We'll look through the comments. I appreciate everybody coming on Super Bowl Sunday to listen to a couple of knuckle dragging knuckleheads talk about something that we're embracing. Why? Because it affects us, it affects our family, it affects those we work with, and it is overall affecting our communities and our construction sites. And it's something that is probably going to bring or will bring the healing that we need in construction to start that healing step for us to build in a group of people who aren't just wounded all the time, but can come in with strength of vulnerability and build great things, because that's what we do. That's all I got. I like how that bird, there's a bird at the end, crickets, moments of silence. I love
That's
that.
just-
Hey, thanks so much, Matt. Thanks so much, Adam, for going
Thank you,
along
guys.
with this. And we will see you guys on the other side. Have a great weekend.
Sorry, Swifties. George Kittle's going to win.